him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer." The manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, "And how much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told them, "Take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings."
Stop right there. Oftentimes, folks will use this parable and it quits here at verse 9. What is your first impression hearing this? The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. But the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. This is Jesus talking. What pops in your head when you hear that?
Doesn't make sense.
Huh?
It doesn't make sense.
Why doesn't it make sense?
Well, it just doesn't sound like Jesus.
It doesn't sound like Jesus.
Buy yourself some friends.
Buy yourself some friends. Right. Yeah, okay.
The MC
Okay.
Hammer approach?
Do what,
Is
Calvin?
that the MC Hammer approach?
The empty, okay, yeah. This is what throws a lot of people. But the parable doesn't end there. Okay? Let's read on. Who would read verses 10 through 15 for me, please? Go ahead, Kevin.
One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you to the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Am I in the wrong place?
No, you're good. Keep going to 15.
The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all these things, and they ridiculed him. And he said to them, "You are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts. For what is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God."
All right. The parable of the shrewd manager. So when I was preparing for this, I don't know how many of y'all have watched this particular show. So when you think about the shrewd manager, I always kind of come back comically to this particular show. How many in here are managers? Raise your hands. By profession, if you're a manager, raise your hand. Okay, what do you manage?
Finance team.
A finance team. Okay, all right. And when you look at your day-to-day, what do you feel like you're having to manage?
The personalities, right? And I need to mix the team or orchestrate the team, so I balance their weaknesses and their strengths to get to the outcome.
Okay, all right. So here are people. All right. Who else is a manager? Yes, sir.
I manage a couple different construction crews.
Oh, okay. What do you find yourself having to really manage there?
Mainly, believe it or not, like there is organization and coordination, but like people's temperaments
Yeah.
and like working out stuff between
Yeah.
the guys. Yeah, it's like a lot of
Yeah,
temperamental
that's
stuff.
a
Yeah,
full-
it is. Yeah.
People's temperaments. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I got you. Who else is a manager? I know there's a bunch of you. Liz.
It's a cardiac clinic,
Okay.
so
And so what do you find yourself managing day to day?
it's very similar to what he said, strengths and weaknesses of each nurse or
Okay.
practitioner and matching them up with patients.
Okay. Okay. All right. I'm hearing a lot of people in this management.
But also the budget gets cut every year by a little bit more.
Okay.
And so you're asked to do more with less.
Okay. Okay. How many managers in here deal with that? Raise your hands. If you handle and have to be accountable for a budget, a department budget, the finance of your team, raise your hands. Get a few. Bill,
Yes.
what's your greatest challenge managing that?
Managing the expectations of my managers.
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
So, you know,
Uh-huh.
I can remember many times when I had to, you know, I would tell my bosses and how much money we could do next year, revenue-wise. But in order to have that, I needed this team to do it.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And they would say, well, we like your revenue number, but we don't like your expense number. And so they would say, do it, get that number with less.
Okay. Okay. So in essence, you have a master or a few masters within your world that you have to report to. Okay. Anybody else in a similar boat? I think we have all at some point through our career, whether you're an executive, whether you're middle management, you're managing high and low. You've got personalities above you. You've got your master, so to speak, that you're having to be responsible for or accountable for. And when things don't go wrong, you're having to answer to them. And then everything below, you got people, you got money, personalities. You got a lot of stuff that's happening, right? Customers, that's a whole nother venue. So I'm in management, I'm on the sales side of things. So I deal with a lot of customers out here in the field, and then I have to balance with internal management to make sure customers are being treated right, and or when they're not, I'm the ones getting calls. So yes, you have a lot to balance. When you're in management, you have to be pretty astute. Right? You have to be observant. You have to be sort of thinking ahead, what's happening now. You got to be just focused. What does the term shrewd mean?
I think of it as wise, but in a sneaky way. I don't know if that's
Okay.
true.
Yeah.
Someone who's kind of able to balance all those things. They're
Mhm.
able to look at all
Okay.
the different
Yeah.
variables and
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to make them work.
Yeah. Sometimes this can be construed as sort of a deceiving sort of way.
Like work to his benefit, right? Like I
Okay.
think that's the
Uh-huh.
part of the shrewd, the sneaky bit.
Yes.
It's all balancing, but you're, in the end, who's winning is the person,
Mhm.
just by a bit. the
Yeah.
third person.
You know, I've worked for management levels through my career, and I think we've all witnessed this. So depending on the department you might be involved with, budgets are a perfect thing. When it comes down to budgets, you have to protect your own. Otherwise, the other department that theoretically you're competing against could get those resources from you. So it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game that's going on. Some could say, well, you're just kind of being greedy, trying to pull it. Well, but if I don't ask for it, if I don't get it, then someone else is going to, it's a lot of back and forth. Shrewdness is looking at those details, trying to manipulate, if you will, to your benefit. Some could say, well, that just sounds a little deceiving. Or some may say, well, that's just good management. You have to, this is what you're paid to do. Jesus uses an interesting example here. As we read this parable, what's happening? What do we first witness? The shrewd manager, how does the master react to him initially?
He's gonna fire
He's gonna fire him. Yeah, why?
him. Incompetent.
He's incompetent. Yeah. What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management because you cannot be manager any longer. Because the rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So then the manager says to himself, well, what shall I do now? The master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So here's something interesting about this parable. And I had to read this a few times. His master approached him saying, you're done. You got to do something different because you've been wasting my possessions. But yet, you read down a couple verses, the guy says, I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job, people welcome me into their houses. I think there's a little stretch of time period where he knows maybe it's not lost yet. He's going to lose it, so he's got to do something about it before he exits the building. Now, usually, when you're laid off, you're laid off. Here's your final day, but sometimes you might have a day where you know you've got some time. Sorry, Liz, we're cutting the department. Your last day is going to have to be February 28th, and here's why, blah, 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 blah. So get your things in order before you exit the building. That can happen. Because when it caught me by surprise, I'm thinking, how can a manager all of a sudden just start manipulating resources under his master's guidance? Like, it's strange, right? What is the manager, what's he doing with these resources? In his desperation, his final moments, what's he doing?
Cutting a deal.
He's cutting deals. Interesting. Why do you think that is?
He's trying to save his job.
He's trying not to burn some bridges, you know, I mean, for future.
Yeah,
Friends.
friends.
He's still cheating
somebody's
his
house to
manager.
go into.
He doesn't want to be out on the street.
I'm hearing different things. Somebody said he's trying to save his job. I think his job is gone, at least with his master. Carol, you said he's trying to prevent being on the street?
Out on the street.
So he's manipulating, he's giving out some grace so that he will hopefully get some grace so that he's not out on the street. He sees that that's what could happen, so
Yeah.
he is, to use a word I wasn't gonna use manipulate, but he's handing out some grace.
Okay, yeah.
Not a ton, 1,000
Yeah.
down to 800. I thought it's not a lot, it's a little bit.
He's giving a little grace.
Little
so he
grace
can get
because
some
he
back.
wants it in return.
Mm-hmm. Okay, okay.
I think it might specifically be about the people whose houses he's going into and like cutting them a deal. Because he says, I've decided what to do so that when I'm removed from management, so he knows it's happening, it's not if, it's when,
Right.
people may receive me into their houses. He's too proud to beg. And so he's like, if I go to these people and I say, listen, I know you owe him like 1,000, but how about we just do 800 instead? They're gonna be so grateful that they're more likely to be like, oh, you know what, come stay with me. You saved me some money. We don't mind hosting you for a little while.
Yeah, yeah. He is protecting his relationships for the long term. He knows he's exiting out of this employment, but he's trying to save a little face with some of his call them key accounts, right? I'll scratch my back if you scratch, or I'll scratch yours if you scratch mine. I lose my job. Carol, maybe you and your family can find me a job or be a good reference for me on my next gig. It's a little give and take. Is that deceiving, or is that just good?
He's stealing from his boss.
Right. He is stealing from his boss.
to be totally honest, like, I've never had the answer to this really, because like he's helping him, but he is lying. Like, there's money that's not going to be there, and the boss is going to be like, wait a minute, didn't he? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. So this has always kind of slightly confused me.
This is confused a bunch.
But
It's-
he
yes.
can also, I mean, that's in his job description, he has that power to let people off, like, all right, hey, I got, you know, half, I'm never gonna get anything else, like somebody at the bank or something, they've got the power to sort of give a little bit of grace, it's in their job description, so as long as he has that manager hat on, he's not stealing from his boss has bestowed on him that power to accept more or be like, all right, well, this is as good as I'm gonna get, that's my judgment, I'm being a good steward of the
Mhm.
money, and just say, all right, like, better get, you know, 80% now, and you know, forgive the 20 because we're never gonna get it, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of his,
Yeah.
I think.
Excellent.
And he could go to these people and say, hey, you got me fired, you owe me.
Oh, yeah, that's true. A little bit of leverage, yeah, a little leverage. But this is what really throws everybody off. So go to verse 8. Jesus says, the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly.
He didn't commend him for his dishonesty. Commended him for his shrewdness.
Shrewdness. Being astute to the detail. Working it out for the favor. Shrewdness. Making the decisions, making the deals to set up for something better. Yes, ma'am.
My mind just went back to another parable that we've done. Yes, he's being commended, for doing something, rather than being the person, the servant who was given something and went and hid it and did nothing. If we can recall that, so it does fit. You're talking about those multiple references to something similar. It just, all of that just popped in my head. He did something.
He didn't sit on the sidelines
Exactly.
and
He's
lick
being
his
commended
wounds.
for
He,
doing-
he
did
was trying to,
something.
he was trying to make this thing work in his favor. Deceiving or not, he was trying to make it work in his favor. Keep reading verse 8. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. Look around at our world today. I think we would all agree. I mean, we see it in the news, we see it everywhere. There's shrewdness happening all the time, right? That's just kind of human nature, right? Jesus goes on to say in verse 9, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings.
So that's the part that gets me, Brian. If I can try to stretch and say, okay, maybe the master was pleased because by this manager offering grace to people, that reflects on the master as well. And so, you know, people know, okay, this manager works for that master. He's giving me a discount here. He's canceling some of my debt. So they're going to have a favorable opinion of that master now, as well as the manager. But then in verse 9, the I tell you part, that's where I get a little bit twisted, because that's generally where Jesus says, and the moral of this parable is, you know, we're kind of out of the parable now, and Jesus is speaking, I tell you this statement, and that statement makes no sense to me.
And it doesn't if we just stopped at that statement. Because that statement can be interpreted in different ways. I was just like BJ. When I read this, I'm thinking, that's Jesus talking? I tell you, my first inclination was that he's telling me it's okay for me to buy my friends. It's okay?
Well, he says that
Go ahead, Jack.
make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into eternal homes. I think we assume that's heaven. Hell is eternal.
Now I'm really confused.
That is kind of flippant.
Maybe
So,
say
like,
more about that.
So I'm probably oversimplifying it, but I think like a lot of times like worldly wealth. I mean, Jesus is always playing these like heavenly wealth, worldly wealth. Like it's possible, like when he's just talking about worldly wealth, unrighteous wealth, it's just like worldly business dealings, right? Like that's not for the kingdom. You're just doing your job. And so to me, like you could take this as just like he's playing like the long game. Like if you are blessed with worldly wealth, if you work in business and you've been able to profit for yourself, don't hoard that wealth. Use it to help others because eventually you may not have that wealth, and and you may need it. But I don't know. I think we also make the wrong assumption that we assume the master is like some sort of super righteous person. We're like, oh, he's deceiving his master. Like his master probably commends him for being shrewd because his master probably got wealthy by doing this. Like he's a loan shark, basically.
Yeah.
He just loans people stuff.
It's like the mafia, dealing with the mafia, yeah, it's just like
I mean,
continuous
he's
spiral.
loaned people a bunch of stuff. Like he's
Right.
gonna just take these people down probably if they don't pay it. So like I think we act like the manager is some sort of like amazing person, but like he's probably just as dishonest as the guy who's, his master over.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's part of the confusion is that in most parables that you read, when there's a master involved, we sort of end up interpreting that as, okay, that's God. But in this case, it feels like that doesn't seem like the character of God. Like he doesn't seem like a dishonest, shrewd loan shark.
Can you reread from where it says, I say to you, just that line? I say to you.
Use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings.
Brian,
I
I don't
think
want
you
to.
could interpret that as use your worldly wealth in such a way that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into heaven, which is not necessarily lie, cheat, and steal. It's more of how you use your wealth is important. But use it in such a way that when it is gone, you are welcomed into eternity.
And I'll go back to Jack's reference here. When we think of eternal dwelling, this can go both ways. But this is why you have to keep reading. The parable does not stop here because the clarification comes out as you go beyond verse 9. But Deb, go ahead. What were
Well,
you
I
gonna
was
say?
just gonna. My study helps, and I don't want to steal your thunder.
No,
but
please.
it helps. He says, I think, like Michael's saying, use worldly wealth. The explanation says God's people should be alert to make good use of what God has given them, right? So our worldly wealth, I think, in some ways we're all given different gifts. So whatever our wealth, I don't know that it necessarily has to just be money, but it could be. And then to gain friends, it says by helping people to become believers and grow in their faith, who in the future will show their gratitude when they welcome their benefactors into heaven. And this way, worldly wealth may be wisely used to gain eternal benefit.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go on to verse 10. Remember, it says here in verse 10, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little also will be dishonest with much. So if you have been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own?
I think we basically landed on the answer, which is like, we had three people kind of say different versions of it, which is pretty much I believe what God is saying is that the worldly wealth perishes, but the eternal relationships don't. So that should be our focus.
The choices we make with the worldly wealth that all of us have access to. It's what we do with it. You have the choice. You can be really deceiving with it and use it for the wrong purpose, or you can still be shrewd and use it for good purposes. It's like a crossroads. No one, go on to verse 13, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. let me stop right here. I want us to jump for the sake of time because, hold on here. Let's go further down chapter 16 to this parable of the rich man and Lazarus. I'll read this. Beginning at verse 19. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with soils and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire. But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you is a great chasm. It's been set in place so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. He answered, Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them so that they will not also come to this place of torment. Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. No, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. He said to him, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. What's happening in this parable?
Foreshadowing.
Huh?
Foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing? All right. Tell me more.
He says that they can't listen to Moses and the prophets. They're not even going to believe if someone raises from the dead. Now, he later on is going to come back from the dead and try to share the gospel with people. And they're still going to say, there's no way. We're still saying it to this day.
Is there anything challenging in this particular parable?
That they can talk, they can see each other, that heaven and hell are through a window.
Yeah,
Just being honest.
That was my mental vision when I read this. Exactly right.
Sometimes I go, huh,
Yeah.
didn't think about it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Carol.
To me, this parable is the opposite of the other one.
Oh, really? Okay. How?
In the first one, in my head, this is the conclusion at this today. Okay. Is that Christians don't just roll over and play dead. I mean, we don't let people run over us. We think, we plan, we're shrewd with what we have and what we do. We have a goal, we have an aim. It's very positive, very forward moving. And then we go to this parable, and it's like God is accepting just the poor. When he's just talked about somebody who was wise with money and knew how to handle it. And so it's a flip-flop to me.
Okay.
Or showing perhaps both sides. That God.
Okay.
Just my thought.
Okay. Other thoughts on this? What do y'all hear out of this particular parable? Rich man and Lazarus.
You get one shot. So you don't get to go back after you're dead and go and try to change things like this. This is your chance if you want to tell people, if you want to live in a way that is serving God, like you do it now. If you want to tell your friends and family to follow God, do it now. Because like when you're dead, you don't get to just go and rewrite.
That's exactly right. And you can't renegotiate with God. There's this chasm, right? I mean, this parable spells it out. I mean, it kind of took me by surprise because I haven't read this parable much. But when I'm like, oh, wow, I guess he's right. There is a major chasm here. There is no turning back. If I go to hell, I can't holler up and try to renegotiate my way out. Because Abraham, God, is saying, hey, Brian, look, you had your time on earth. You had your opportunity. And I can't send anybody from here to you. There is such a great void, a chasm, and it was intentionally built that way. Oh, all right. Well, as the rich man says, well, at least send somebody to my family that is still living and help influence them, because I don't want them to have the same fate that I've got. I will have to go on the limb, and Carol, I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to have to disagree. I think there is a common theme that is happening between these two parables. Can anybody tell me?
Can I-
Yes, Deb.
Can I throw in for Carol for a?
Yeah.
So I had never thought about comparing these two, but at least for me, it's got me thinking, you know, here in the parable of the shrewd manager, you've got somebody who's got their wealth and they're looking at how to use it to further. But the rich man is just living in luxury every day solely for his own, it seems, his own selfish purposes without caring for anybody else or trying to add friends with his wealth, right? He could have taken care of of Lazarus, this beggar. And so it's sort of, for me, Carol's got me thinking, maybe there's the piece of it if you're gonna look at them. One is just, hey, I've got all this stuff and I'm gonna just enjoy it for myself. And this other one is at least, or the message is whoever's trusted with, well, and it's not coming out clearly, but, right, God can trust us, right? If we have the wealth that God has given us on this earth, what are we gonna do with it? Are we going to just live in luxury, or are we gonna be shrewd about what God has given us?
Jack, go ahead.
We keep using this word shrewd, and I don't think it's a good word. As if Jesus thought shrewd was good. The common connection is what makes you rich. The Jews came from a world, the Old Covenant, where you did X, God did Y for you. So if you were rich, that meant you were good. And he's telling them that's not true in either case. You can be shrewd and dishonest. And that's what the previous guy was. He was shrewd and dishonest. And he helped himself. But he wasn't going to be entrusted with the riches that counted. And the same thing is true in the second one. The guy thought he was good because he was rich. And he wasn't good. He went to hell. And Lazarus, who was extremely poor, went to heaven. So he was entrusted with the true riches. And the guy who was rich in this life wasn't in the next.
Do extremely poor people have a free go to heaven card?
No.
I think this is what we have to be careful of. They don't. But neither does the rich. Bill.
Well, I think that the transition is in the verse that says, you cannot serve both God and money. And I think that both parables are addressing that. I think in the Lazarus, the rich man was money oriented and did not see God at all, right? Whereas Lazarus saw God. And, you know, I think that transition there, you cannot serve God and money, is the theme between both of them.
Who did the rich man really did not see, though? The parable, he totally missed Lazarus. Totally missed Lazarus. the parable here really doesn't give a strong indication of Lazarus and God in that connection. He just all of a sudden he goes to heaven. We don't know the backstory on that. But this parable really drives home the rich man ignoring Lazarus. He has all this beautiful wealth. But even his dogs paid more attention to Lazarus than what he did. They're licking his sores, which is gross, but you know. But it proves the point that our worldly wealth, it's what we do with this. Remember who Jesus is talking to. He has a bunch of Pharisees that are in this when he's talking to them. And there's a separation. Pharisees have a lot of wealth. They've got this image, this aura. Everybody else is below them. This is what society then is battling. Right? And Jesus is like, look, hold on. You can have the wealth. It's what you're going to do with it. That this is your choices that you make with this while your time on earth is what really helps determine your eternity. I'll leave you with this. And I think, again, I'm just facilitator of this class. We can read these parables and there's unique understandings and lessons in all of this. But here's my conclusion to this. There is a common theme between these two. Our choices impact our faith. They impact our eternity. I think we're all fairly wealthy that are in this room of differing degrees, but it's what we do with these resources, our time on earth, that God is, he's watching from above to see what we do, because as he says, it's if we, again, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. There has to be a priority. That's a challenge. That is a challenge. It hits me, right? I mean, my wife and I, we all work hard to build our families, to save and invest, and we can get caught up in all of this, right? Man, but if I'm not careful, I can let money drive all of my daily decisions, and I lose focus of God. I lose focus of Lazarus. I lose focus of the guy that's at the door hurting and suffering. I just ignore him and walk on by. Shame on me. Woo. This right here, use money and love Jesus and people, not the other way around. We don't use Jesus and people and love money. I think both of these parables really hit to the point of that shrewd manager, yes, he can make decisions. He's making decisions he's looking for the long term. It's going to affect his eternity. He's astute. Hard to blame him. Now, the choices he makes, that will guide what's going to happen in the end. We go on to see the rich man and Lazarus situation. The rich man had the wealth, but he just ignored it. And ultimately, we're all going to be either heaven or hell. And when we get there, there's no renegotiation at that point. Any other thoughts on these two? It is the most difficult parable that I think you guys will encounter here, for sure. But hopefully we had a little fun with it and got something out of it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
I think it depends on my
So I'm not, maybe not.